Hello everybody and welcome back to another BlenderMadeEasy tutorial. Today I'll be showing you how to render your fire with transparency. Why would you want to do this? Well, there's a lot of cool things that you can do with transparent fire. See this default cube? Now it's gone. You can add fire all over your scene really easily with almost any editing program. I think my computer might be overheating. Anyways, with transparent fire, it's a little bit more complicated than it might seem to render this out. You might think to go over to the render settings, underneath film, turn on transparency, but the problem is if we press F12 to render this, you will notice that everything is gone except the UV sphere. Where is our fire? Well, technically the fire is still rendering, it's just not showing up in this view. And you can test this by coming over to this menu and selecting just the color and not the alpha. If we select color, there we can see our fire. To get started with this tutorial, we're going to create a basic simulation. If you already have a simulation that you just want to add transparency to, skip to this part of the video. First off, we're going to select the UV sphere, go over to Object, down to Quick Effects, and then Quick Smoke. This will automatically add a domain for us. With the domain selected, we're going to go into Front View, scale it up slightly, and drag it up. We can jump over to the Physics tab and set the resolutions to 128. We can also scroll down underneath the fire section and turn up the vorticity of the flames. I'm going to go with 0.7. If we open up the cache setting, we can set the type over to modular instead of replay, and this will allow us to bake in the simulation. I'm going to select my UV sphere and change the flow type from smoke over to fire. And underneath the flow source, we're going to set the emission to 1. With that done, let's go ahead and bake in our simulation. Select your domain and click on Bake. The bake has finished. Now if we hit the spacebar, we can view our simulation. Here's what it looks like. Not too bad, it baked out 50 frames. Now let's go ahead and set up the material and render this out. I'm going to select my domain and go over to the Material tab. Underneath the volume, we're going to set the density down to 0. I don't want there to be any smoke, I only want there to be fire. Next up, underneath the black body intensity, I'm going to bring this up to 10. If we press Z and go into rendered view, and I am in cycles right now, we can see our fire right here and it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and render this out. I'm going to position the camera right about here and hit Ctrl-Alt-0 to snap the camera to place. Then you can select it, press G, middle mouse button, and drag it backwards. Now let's go over to the render settings. If we go underneath film, we are going to need to turn on transparency. Another thing you're going to want to check is underneath the output section that the color mode is set to RGBA. This will allow us to use an alpha channel for the render. This is very important. If you don't do this, your render will not work. With that done, let's go ahead and press F12 to render out an image. If for some reason your image looks like this without any emission on the UV sphere, the reason for that is because you're not on the correct frame number. If I exit out of this window, you will see I'm on frame 75, but I only baked in 50 frames. We need to jump over to a frame that I already baked. So if we jump over to frame about 43 or something like this, then we'll be able to view the fire. So with frame 43, if we press F12, now we can see the UV sphere actually has some light. So make sure you do render the frame that has the fire baked in. The render has finished, and once again, you can't see the fire. But in order to check to see if this is actually rendering, come over to this menu and select just the color channel right here. Once we do this, there we can see the fire in our scene. So the next step is to actually mask out where the fire is and where the background is. We can do this in the Compositor. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this window and jump over to the Compositing tab. Select Use Nodes and then press N to close off that panel and bring this down so we have a little bit more room. The first step is to add in a Math node. I'm going to select the render layers and drag this over to the left and then press Shift A and go underneath Converter and Math. If we then take the image, plug that into the top input, and then the alpha channel, plug that into the bottom input. And then if we Control Shift left click on the add node, there we can see our mask. So all we have to do now is set this as the alpha channel. If we drag this over to the right and then press Shift A, add in a converter and then set alpha right here, we can then take the image, plug it into the image, and then this value will go into the alpha channel. And here we go, you can see the fire is now masked out with the transparent background. And that's basically all you really need to do. We can see we've masked out the fire, but there is a couple problems. First off, the colors are a little bit weird. In order to fix the colors, we need to press Shift A and add in a color ramp node. We'll place that here. If we then take the white value and drag this closer to the black value, we can see we get some of that color back in our scene, just like that. Now this looks pretty good, we have the color back in our scene, but there is one more issue, is that the edges of the fire look really sharp. What we can do is actually add a blur node and feather the edges of this mask, because if we Control Shift left click on this, this is just a mask. So we can control how much blur there is on this. If I press Shift A and add in a filter and then a blur node, we'll place that right here. Then we'll switch this over to fast. We can set the amount of blur with these two values. Let's try 25 for both of these. We can see the edges are now blurred. If we take the image, plug that into the alpha, then Control Shift left click on this, now we have a little bit of a feathered edge. This might be a little bit too much though, so we'll drag that down to 20. One last thing that you can do is add a glow to the entire thing. If we press Shift A and go underneath filter and then a glare node, we'll place that here. If we switch this over to fog glow, we can add a glow to the fire and this will make it look a lot better. This threshold value controls the amount of glow that will be in your scene. If I drag this lower, we will have more glow. Just like that, if I drag it higher, we will have less glow. I think a value of 1.5 works for most scenes. If you want to, you can add in a color balance node and mess around with the colors to get it looking exactly how you want. If you think the yellows are a little bit too prominent, maybe you can change the highlights over to more of an orange color. Something like this. And there you can see the oranges are a lot more visible now. And then from here, all you have to do is render out your animation. I think I'm going to move the camera back just slightly so it doesn't clip the edge of the fire. I'll press G middle mouse button, drag it backwards. And then over in the output section, once again, make sure you're using a PNG and then RGBA and set an output right here. Once you have found the folder that you want, just click accept and then render this out as an image sequence. From there, you can import it into any scene. One quick thing that I forgot to mention, if you're rendering smoke, you don't need to do this whole setup with the nodes. The smoke will automatically render just fine with transparency. If you are using fire and smoke, then you will have to do that. For example, this is just a fire and smoke simulation. I turned off the fire so we can see it in the render, and as you can see, the smoke is rendering just fine. If we were to turn on the fire by bringing the black body intensity up to a value of 10, press F12, we get some weird results, as you can see here. The smoke looks very strange, it has this yellow tint to it, so what you need to do now is set up the nodes one more time. If we go over to the compositor, all we have to do is just set up the whole nodes again with the set alpha. We'll take the image, plug that into the set alpha, and there we have our fire back in our scene. So with smoke, you don't need the setup, but if you're using any sort of fire, you will need to set up the add, the color ramp, and the set alpha node. So there you go guys, that is how you render fire with transparency. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribe for more tutorials in the future. If you have any suggestions on what you would like to see next, leave a comment down below. If you created something cool from this tutorial, I would love to see it, so make sure to send it to me on Instagram at BlenderMadeEasy. That's going to be it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.